I'm Alan Wartes, and this is ThinkRadio Presents ThinkBusiness. My guest today is leadership educator, theorist, and coach Paul Duba.
I'm going to go kind of big picture here, that as a species, we came out of the trees on the savannah with, our little no claws, no fangs, our little bare pink butts, and we came together as familial and tribal groups that had to work together.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
ThinkBusiness is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like Think Business, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Duba holds a Master of Public Administration degree from University of Colorado in Denver. He's a certified executive coach and has spent 25 years helping people in business, government, education, and defense understand the power and the benefit of good leadership. With a background as an outward-bound facilitator, his coaching methods extend far beyond the office or the classroom to include hands-on experiential training in the outdoors. Duba is an adjunct professor at Western Colorado University and is the author of a model called the Do-Be Model for Leadership and Teamwork. I'm pleased to have Paul Duba. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Alan.
I'm struck by the fact that if one wants to become an engineer, you go to engineering school, you get your stamp of approval, and there are a set of skills that are widely accepted to define good engineering practice. How does that work with leadership? There's not as far as I know, there's not a single textbook. There's not a single set of certified ideas that say, okay, this is good leadership, and you've now passed the course, and we're gonna certify you to go out there and lead. How does a field like leadership even work?
The view from where I sit is premised on leadership being a practice, something you work towards and may never actually arrive.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's tough in a world where we really like to arrive.
It's extra tough because this is kind of like the blind man and the elephant. Leadership looks different to different people. There are certification programs out there that will stamp you on the forehead. You're a leader. And you still have to go and do it. So I think of it more as a continuum. I think a lot about emerging leaders. I also think a lot about leaders that can't help themselves. They came into their adulthood wanting to make a difference. It's that kid that organizes the treehouse club, or where we're going to go skate, or what have you, and that it's the usual suspects. By the time I see undergraduates in my leadership class, they have been on athletic teams. We can just go across the different ways that people step up to leadership.
They've been in student council through high school, maybe even starting in elementary school.
And they can't help themselves, which is awesome.
Well, except that it's one thing to be a natural-born leader, but it's another to be any good at it, right? I mean, there are ways to lead that aren't all that beneficial.
Yeah. This leads to one of the fundamental questions. Are leaders born? Can you make them? I suggest that at the very least you do have to put your hand in the air. There's kind of looking around going, is somebody going to do this? I can't stand by and see things going the way they are without forwarding my own agency in imagining a different future.
So what are the characteristics that make a person one of those people? If you're going to go out and look for them, you're going to, visit a high school today or a group of undergraduates in college. What would you look for to say, yeah, okay, I think that's you?
I would look for compassion. I would look for, I want to make a difference, which, in the way I look at leadership, and it's in the literature. This is not original to me. It's wanting a change of some sort. There's a point A where we're at, and I imagine a point B.
Even if point B is, let's have a great Christmas party this year.
Exactly. Better than the last one. Because that last one went so bad, and, the eye roll, and who's with me on this vision. So suddenly my vision is inviting people to join in that different outcome. And I would look, it really does key around compassion. I see young leaders sometimes wanting it for suspicious reasons. I want to be important or have power. It's a little bit of a nuanced thing, but wherever there's compassion, there's a kind of leadership that we're going to talk about that is the leadership that will help us solve difficult problems. The idea that I am the smartest person in the room, that kind of leader, it's leadership. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of people that kind of come into their adulthood with that. They are the engineers. Like, I've got the most training, the most experience. I've got a sharp mind and the ability to put these different pieces together, and I'm ready to teach you how to do what I know.
Yeah, get with my program. Let's go.
And there's plenty of leadership that needs to take place on that plane. The leadership that helps solve problems that haven't been solved already, or ones that require, I'm just going to go down this rabbit hole, multiple perspectives. The way I see this and the way you see this, and the fact that we're coming from different perspectives or different cultural orientations, requires us to suspend deep, profound belief that I'm right or that you're right, and to come to a new way of understanding this, and then we can solve the problem. Mm-hmm. I have to get past think I'm supposed to be the smartest person in the room. Get past thinking I'm supposed to be the smartest person in the room.
That it's okay not to be.
It's okay not to be. Compassion really enables that shift of mindset. To be with somebody else's suffering is the etymology of that word, compassion.
What you've brought up here is very interesting to me because it kind of depends on what your goal is. I mean, if we want to build the safest, most structurally sound bridge to carry traffic across a body of water, I want the engineer. And there really is kind of one way to look at physics.
Absolutely.
So if your goal is to do things like that, there's a style of leadership that's appropriate. But what you're talking about are some of the softer tasks that society faces.
Yes.
Political issues, sort of community issues, issues of how do we collectively solve big problems.
Right. So the military coined the VUCA, V-U-C-A, acronym to capture those kind of problems. They're volatile. Volatile means outsized results. Sometimes, I'm going to use my hand here. You pull the lever really hard and you get a bigger result than you expected, or you pull the lever really hard and you get a little result. It's volatile. You can't really tell what's going to happen. It's uncertain is the U. They're complex, which means it's a system that has a lot of
lots of pieces,
inputs, and ambiguous. Well, we don't really understand it yet. How will we understand it?
And what's a good example of a VUCA problem?
Well, one that is my go-to is graduation rates out of high school where a minority population has an less graduation than those minority students' peers from the status quo population.
Higher dropout rates.
Higher dropout rates, exactly. Failure to graduate.
So that's a problem. We're going to try to solve that problem.
Right. And we could go at it from the perspective of the teachers. We could go at it from the perspective of the parents or the students. We could go at it from the perspective of the juvenile courts and diversion, because those dropout kids are actually have an impact, and thus people feel strongly about it from their perspective in law enforcement and the judicial. You've got typically nonprofit advocacy groups that have their opinion. How are you?
Well, you've got cultural history playing a role. You've got messaging in the media playing a role. And all of those, if I understand you right, are levers that you pull on.
Right. And any one of those persons is going to pull hard on their level. We'll just give them more homework, or we'll explain it to the parents. And in that particular case, you don't move the needle very far on outcomes. It's going to take a bigger conversation. And you may never get, it may take generations to move the needle on that outcome.
And so you also need people pulling multiple levers at once, right? And that's where maybe the C comes in. You've got complexity involved.
Yeah. And once you convene that group of, I'll call them stakeholders in this desired outcome, we want those kids to graduate. You may find that the different groups are actually pulling against each other.
Okay, so now you've laid that foundation. What does proper leadership look like when you've got a complex task like that? What are the hallmarks of a leader that can come in and actually make a difference?
So the Do-Be model suggests that those kind of problems, I'm going to use some of the language from the literature, they're adaptive. We don't have the answer yet. My answer from my perspective and your answer from your perspective, and this stakeholder group that maybe has a dozen different ways of approaching this, are inadequate to solve the problem. And by that I mean the way we understand the problem, the way I know the problem and myself in relationship to it actually limits what I can do. And I'm going to have to learn and adapt, take in different perspectives, and essentially grow my understanding. Well, it is the parents from this cultural background, and it is a student body and the culture of being a student in that building, and it is the culture of the district and the state reporting standard. And all the different pieces, we're going to have to find a common denominator for understanding this problem that's going to force me to not only entertain a different way of looking at this, but I may have to abandon something I was holding very dear to, the power over my classroom.
Well, so that starts to sound like the leaders themselves have to start by providing themselves with a little bit of leadership and understanding where they have to change before they can even begin to make progress. Is that something that you would agree with?
I would agree with that. So back to your question, which I didn't fully answer, the leadership for this requires a convening, facilitative function. It won't be the superintendent or the chief of police or the president of the PTA. It's going to have to be somebody who has no authority over all these different pieces, and yet who can, by helping convene a sense of urgency, a common cause, what I like to call a desired future state, the point B to our point A, that is compelling enough to get people to sit down and then engage in the hard work of changing their minds. And not just it's a changing of operational mindset. And so this gets into the world of ontology, and I am, as a being, not just a teacher or a parent or a student or a school administrator. Have a being that is going to mesh with all these other pieces. I'm part of a bigger community, and I suddenly have identity, and that compelling desired future state suddenly has kept a really diverse group of stakeholders at that table, a convened big table, to engage in the difficult work of imagining a different future. Not from where I was, but I've become somebody different. I am a different person. All the people at this table, that's the leadership that goes into that kind of problem solving. You're no longer the smartest person in the room. You're not problem solving, but you are solving the process of, wow, I need to make sure that we need those parents at the table. What will we have to do to make them feel comfortable, welcome, and not like a token presence? Repeat that same phrase for every different person. And the definition of who needs to be at that table is if they're not at the table, they'll be in a position to thwart, sabotage, dismantle.
Or just their absence leaves something important out of the possible solutions. It strikes me that what you're talking about is democracy. You're talking about the ability to collectively solve problems in a way that sounds great in theory, and in a way that our nation was sort of founded to explore. But you're talking about the ability to account for multiple points of view.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, is that something that we find very difficult to do as a society these days? Because it certainly seems like it. You look at the news, and there's very little apparent evidence of groups coming together on any kind of a large scale. We're more likely to sit in opposite corners of the room and lob inflammatory statements.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the perception. What do you think?
I think that it's always been hard. I think I'm going to go kind of big picture here, that as a species, we came out of the trees on the savannah with, our little no claws, no fangs, our little bare pink butts, and we came together as familial and tribal groups that had to work together. We essentially put our backs to each other and faced a very hostile, difficult world. We evolved from that, and I would suggest that over time we've gotten better and better at convening larger groups, communities, cities, states, that we're willing to have each other's back. And this is not a continuous, uninterrupted process. We've had setbacks. We have genocide. We have
world wars.
And civilization is actually a pretty thin veneer on the animal that we are. But nonetheless, this arcs towards greater collaboration, and we have solved bigger problems. We have gotten better at this, and I suggest that everything we have done that is good in this enterprise of humankind has come through our ability to organize people around an idea that's worthy, that desired future state, and getting people to take the risk of trying that thing out.
So that's very interesting. We're here at this point of polarization.
Sure.
A lot of people talk about that in our politics, in our culture, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of fear. You're saying, yeah, that's nothing new. We've been here before.
I believe that's true. It doesn't make it any less urgent to what I consider our obligation to accelerate that process through leadership education. We have plenty of bad leadership we can point to. When I ask my students, give me an example of bad leadership, the eyes roll. There's plenty of examples.
Yeah.
But when I ask for examples of good leadership, everybody has that thing. And it's, of course, a self-selecting group. These students were the ones that put their hand in the air. They know that it's possible.
And what do they say good leadership looks like?
It's a feeling. I think that the brain science now is actually turning up some field explanations that when people come together and are truly motivated, and I'm not talking about a team that's just sort of puttering along and getting good results, but when people really lean into a challenge, if you will, backed into the same corner, and they're like, okay, our survival depends on this, whether that's a literal survival or one where the mission is just so compelling, a business. We will not make it in this marketplace if we don't lean into this, and all the language that has turned up around truly inspired behavior in a group that supports high performance. There's a feeling that you get, and it's these people depend on me. That sense of being needed is a very important convening dynamic for that feeling. And all of a sudden, I watch teams as an Outward Bound instructor, my 10,000 hours of putting 10 strangers together and getting them to point in the same direction. And there's this little click that happens, and all of a sudden, I'm no longer teach them how to light a stove or navigate with a map and compass or set up their tarp or hold an ice axe in their hand. All of a sudden, my leadership turns into holding that field and letting them get the hang of it, because all of a sudden they're becoming the leaders in their own space. I believe it's very analogous to all leadership. You create the space for that feeling, and it's in our DNA. We want to work together. We wouldn't have survived out there on the savannah if we didn't.
Well, speaking of feelings, let's go back to the word that you used practically in your first sentence today, and that was compassion. That you feel that good leadership always has an element of compassion, and I would maybe add the word empathy, the ability to feel what it would be like to be the person on the opposite side of the table. Is that something that you can teach? Or is that something that we just have to have? A society just has to sort of be loaded with the capacity for empathy?
I think teaching is maybe not the word I would use. We can put people in situations where they access the compassion that is in them, and by accessing it, get better at accessing it. And in a very long career of working with people, I'd say it's hardest to mobilize when we're sitting across a really strong cultural divide, a values divide.
Something like what we're experiencing today.
Yeah. Religion or partisan politics or some kind of zero-sum perspective. If these people are going to take my job away from me, or that kind of mindset. But the compassion is there. And again, I don't think we would have survived out there on the savannah if we didn't have it for people. I think probably, biologically, our family started out as a really strong, motivating force that allowed us to give beyond our own self-interest. We take care of children, we take care of our elders, we take care of blood relatives. But eventually we became, these extended family units and tribes, and culturally intact entities, that compassion grew, to include those people. It's there. So how do we teach it? Was your question?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the experiential process. My model suggests that compelling sense of urgency around a desired future state is a precondition. And once you have that, people are willing to access the compassion that is in them, to see other people as worthy of traveling with you,
Mm-hmm.
see other people and their difficulties as your difficulties.
So on a cultural level, I can see that at work, although it's hard work to get people to see the other and put themselves in the other's point of view. Let's sort of take that whole conversation and shift it over to the business world.
Okay.
Because I can see you talking to a group of executives and using some of the same language that you've just used with us, and receiving some resistance, because if I've got quarterly goals to meet, it would be easy for me to think, well, what possible role can compassion play in the goals that have been set for me in my business? What's your answer to that?
My answer to that is quarterly returns have been very bad for leadership.
So it's structurally tough.
It's structurally tough. Organizations that look past the quarter to sustainability, then all of a sudden compassion is the precondition for risk-taking. If I can ask for help, if I can ask for feedback, how could I have done this better? Is there something we haven't tried? There's a whole, whatever the good side of the Pandora's box is, of possibility that opens up that leads to innovation, creativity. No new ideas come out of people trying to protect themselves and essentially see, like, well, if I figure out a way to pull Jimmy down, I'm more likely to survive to the next, through the next layoff cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's coming up with new ideas.
And so leaders in that situation then can exercise compassion by looking at their workforce and seeing them as more than cogs in the wheel, seeing them as essential to whatever that desired future outcome is. And how does that work practically? If you were going to sit in that room with those executives and say, okay, listen, here are the top 3 things that you need to be thinking about in order to move in that direction, what are they?
Top 3
actions you can take this week to make this new kind of leadership more a part of your daily routine.
Create a mission-driven organization, one that you can trace all action to a supportive mission, and then build the culture that will inspire.
Easy to say. That's a multi-year project.
Oh, yeah. Going back to the graduation rates at the high school, we're not going to solve this in a couple of meetings. And whereas your engineer, the person that wants to build that bridge over the water, has all the information, and all you got to do is start mobilizing resources, and we're going to call those technical challenges. The adaptive challenges are...
That's the long game.
It's a long game. So back to the quarterly returns are hard on the kind of leadership that solves the kind of problems that take longer than a quarter to solve.
What's at stake if we don't learn how to see beyond quarterly returns and start folding some of this adaptive leadership into what we do and how we do it?
I wish I had the quote off the tip of my tongue, a short, brutish life. It's not sustainable. The kind of problems that we're faced with right now that are the big ones, the overpopulation, resource let's say, resource use that's unsustainable.
Altering the climate.
Climate change will require a bigger conversation, one that's not just local.
A more inclusive one.
And that takes in class differences and wealth disparity.
Different cultural perspectives.
Yep. So what's at stake is being stuck thinking we have a good life in whatever small petri dish you've holed up in, failing to see the bigger picture and to be part of the bigger picture, to sense an identity that is part of that bigger picture.
Well, Paul, thanks for being out there thinking about the stakes and the rewards and how we avoid the one and achieve the other and how we become better leaders. And thanks for coming by today.
It's very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on ThinkRadio Presents Think Business.